Welcome everyone to week 12. This week we finish up our unit. However, I did want to go back and talk a little bit about Africa because this is the chapter that we skipped. And I know I want to give all of you some time to work on your Artboard 2 project. So I'm going to keep this lecture brief, and then I have several documentaries for you to watch below. So instead of being two different assignments, I've kind of put it together into one assignment to give you, again, a little bit more time to work on your artboard project that's due this week. So let's start by looking at this contemporary map of Africa. So Africa is huge, and usually in our modern maps, Africa actually appears smaller than it actually is because it's very difficult to get an elliptical shape onto a two-dimensional surface. So here are all of the countries of modern day Africa. Some of them are changing as we speak, but this is where we're going to be looking. And again, because Africa is so huge, I'm going to focus in mostly on Western Africa. All right. Let's see here. So let's start with Benin culture. And like I said, I'm just going to use this lecture to introduce some of these cultures to you, and then you'll have a chance to watch more of the art and history in the documentaries below. So Benin culture, again, this is in West Africa, and historically it was made up of very powerful city states. And we've seen this kind of confederacy of city states before in ancient Greece as well as in Mesoamerica. The focus of their culture was very military based, similar to what we saw in Mesoamerica, where there was a lot of military and battle imagery. And so we see this reflected in their artwork. They had advanced levels of metallurgy. And in fact, when Europeans first encountered the Benin people, they were amazed that these people had this level of technology, which just goes to show us how Eurocentric past generations were. Of course, in Africa, there was all sorts of scientific and technological advancements taking place at the same time as they were happening in Europe. So they have advanced metallurgy, and this region was especially devastated by the slave trade, and a lot of their history was affected by colonialism, as we'll see with many of these places in Africa, and then when we look at the Pacific Islands as well. So these are the Benin bronzes. These are plaques, which each one has a different figure or sets of figures on them. Now, unfortunately, these originals are not, as you would believe, in Benin today. They are actually found in Europe, and there is a lot of controversy there. In Africa, there's only the copies of the originals for the most part, and the Benin people are still trying to get these back, which were removed from Benin during colonialism. And so let's look at this piece a little bit closer. So there's a lot of vocabulary that we learned in our first unit that we can use to describe this piece. I mean, there's the use of hierarchical scaling, as we can see here. People that are more important appear larger. What we also see in this figure is that, very similar to what we saw in Mesoamerica, it's in South America, these are not hyper-realistic portraits. They are portraits of leaders, by the way. That's what we're seeing here, military leaders. But they're not realistic. They have been abstracted. Their heads are much bigger. Like I said, it's hierarchical scaling. Some figures are smaller than others. And we saw this in ancient Greece, which is also in Africa, right? So there is this tradition of using hierarchical scaling. We see that the hair has been, and the helmets have been stylized, right? The clothing is stylized. And again, this is not because the Benin people did not know how to create, say, a bronze like the Greeks. It is more that what is important here is the stylization and the concept. But I also wanted to show you kind of the opposite side of the style, right? Because oftentimes when we talk about Africa, we tend to talk about it as if it was one culture, when it is so many different cultures, very similar to what I showed you when I showed the ancient Americas and all of the different cultures there. And so while there is African art that is very stylized, that you look at and you say, oh, that looks like African art, we also have African art that is hyper realistic, right? Such as these Ife sculptures. So the Ife culture is also in West Africa. And that's also why I wanted to show you West Africa, because you're going to see a lot of different styles of art just in one region. And what they are best known for are these idealized, realistic portraits of, again, of leaders. And we see this theme throughout our units, where we're seeing a lot of portraits of important leaders. These were also icons of power. All right, they were made from the 13th and 14th century, and again made by the Ife Empire. Let's see, I think I have another image here. So they're made out of a variety of materials, among them bronze, and you're going to see a video that talks a little bit more about these sculptures, because they really are fascinating and unique among the world in terms of the technical ability to create a portrait here. All right. Now we're going to shift gears and we're going to move to Mali, also in West Africa. And the next video I'm going to show you is going to do with the Dogon people in also West Africa, in Mali. And what you're going to see is a different use of the body in art. So in this case, we're looking at masks, which are a huge part of many different cultures in Africa, and in this particular culture of the Dogon. And what I want you to keep in mind as you're watching this video is the relationship between the masks and the performance. The masks are used in a ritual that has become kind of a dance that is done for tourists, but it originates in this very traditional ritual in which the masks are part of this performance. So remember when I talked about performance art, you all got really interested with the naked people kind of dragging themselves around the canvas. But this is also performance art that you're going to see in the video. And then I also want you to think about how we could display these masks to properly convey the rich relationship between the mask and performance. Because if you go to a museum today, you will see these masks under glass. You will not see people wearing them. You will not see them in performance. Of course, we want to preserve the mask and make sure that they don't get damaged. But it's a very Western idea of art, right? That art should be on a pedestal and nobody should touch it, which is contradictory to the original purpose of these masks. So keep all of that in mind as you watch the documentary on the Dogon mask. Now let's see. In terms of contemporary African art, I think this is a type of art that often gets overlooked because people are really drawn to sort of the tribal art created in Africa. But as I showed you, two of the examples that I brought today are from large empires and strong city states of the past. One of them is from tribal culture. And then in terms of contemporary artists, there are a plethora of contemporary African artists and artists that are of the African diaspora that are working with concepts and ideas from Native Africa and also to do with colonization and the diaspora. So, like I said, these artists are working in all styles and media. They're exploring their history and their culture, but they're also conversant in the local and global. So they can talk on a global scale with global contemporary art, but they also have that local flavor to them. So the example I wanted to bring you was Yinke Shonibare, because this is a very famous, he is, I believe, of Nigerian descent, but he lives in Britain. And he creates these amazing pieces. And like I said, I brought them in because they are so eye-catching and most students really love them. You can see here, he's using the human body just in really creative and innovative ways. He uses this type of fabric, which when we look at it, we think it's traditional African print fabric, but it was actually introduced by the Dutch to Africa during the time of colonization. It's originally, I believe it's a Southeast Asian type of fabric, but the Dutch brought it to Africa and it became part of African culture. And then he poses these figures in these very Western styled costumes, historical costumes, with these kind of adopted African print fabrics. And then they don't have heads, and they're in these really interesting poses. Some of them come straight out of Western art history, and some of them are commentaries on colonialism. Some of them that do have heads have like globes as heads. So they are fascinating. There are so many theories about what these mean. And Yinka Shonibare really leaves it open to interpretation oftentimes. And he's an amazing artist. He's still working today. He's gone on to do some non figurative work, but some of his figurative work is my favorite. So I wanted to bring that in for you today. Now, I'm going to switch gears. I said we were going to talk about Africa, but we're also going to talk about the Pacific Islands because I feel like if Africa doesn't get enough love from art history, the Pacific Islands gets even less. And this is a fascinating and really rich culture. So, for the purpose of this lecture and of the videos that I'm going to show you, we're going to focus in on Polynesia. There are a lot of other cultures in this region again, but just focusing in on Polynesia. So looking at the Maori carvings, so the Maori are located in Australia and in New Zealand, and in particular, the video you're gonna watch is of New Zealand, and he's gonna take you in through talking with people of Maori origin so that they kind of tell their story, but also looking at the different locations and types of art that have been created. So these carvings are created of ancestors and they tell stories, and you'll see that in the video. They use a lot of geometric designs, and these spaces are community spaces. So they are town halls, spaces where people congregate. And the Maori are very well known for their wood carving. You're also going to see a very impressive stone carving in the video you'll watch. So these are teko teko, and this is Maori people give carvings of the human body. Now these are usually ancestors, they are gods, they are deities. So that's the type of images that they're carving into these figures. And they're usually done out of wood. They can be monumental, as you'll see in the video, so very large. That's when we say monumental, we just mean at a very large scale, or mobiliary. And these are more mobiliary that I'm showing you here, meaning they're handheld. This is a wooden dagger in painted wood. And you can see here that the Maori are again using stylization. They are using line in really innovative ways. And they are really playing around with positive and negative space. So this is a head from the 19th to 20th century of wood and shell. So again, you're using the material that's around you. In this case, it's wood, it's shell, it's things that you would find on the Pacific Islands. All right. And then the last video that I'm going to have you watch talks about Polynesian body art, and in particular, Polynesian tattooing. This is a really interesting video because it is created by contemporary tattoo artists. So please excuse some profanity in there. But they're talking about how they got in touch with the tradition of Polynesian tattooing and what that's all about. So tattooing has been alive in many cultures for thousands of years. These tattoos reflect community and spirituality. Right? And this is just as a public service announcement, this is why you should not go out there and get what you think is a tribal tattoo that looks very cool, because these tattoos hold a lot of cultural and spiritual significance to people. Now, in terms of the designs, they're often geometric, they have figurative designs, and they also have a lot of sea animals. So you will see things like fish or crabs or octopi, animals that are in their environment. And in this way, the body itself with the tattoo becomes the art form. So we've seen the body used in art in a lot of different ways, from very traditional painting to sculpture, performance, and body art. And so I'm going to wrap it up there because, like I said, I just kind of wanted to give you some context for the videos that you're going to watch.